disrupt their preparation. We are also working with our partners, with governments, with the national sport federations of Council of Europe member states for the organizing of the training process for every single Ukrainian sport team which are now based out of the territory of Ukraine. As for the position of the government on participation together with the Russian Belarusian athletes in sport competitions, well, this position was formed. Its position is clear. The government will not support financially or organizationally the participation of Ukrainian teams in such competitions if Belarusian or Russian athletes will be there. This position was formed on the basis of consultations with the national sport federations. There is only one federation, sport federation, the National Federation of Tennis, that was against of this decision. So this decision of the government was taken in consultation with the sports and Olympic community. However, this decision does not prevent those athletes who decide for themselves to participate on their own decision in the competition. However, Ukrainian state will not support them financially or administratively, as I said. And answering to the question of Ms. Helland, I would like to say that Ukraine expects from Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe the continuing unwavering support of our sovereignty and territorial integrity within international borders. And we believe that for this support, the support for the ban of Russian and Belarusian athletes, who are the tools of war propaganda of these both countries, is very important. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And dear Minister, I don't know your timetable, but if you follow our hearing, it would be nice, and maybe we ask you later to come back. First, I want to inform the hearing members that we have in real following person Mr. Francesco Ricchibiti. He is from the Summer Olympic International Federation. Welcome. We have Madame Gabi Arens from Namibia, Chair of the Athletics Commission of the Association of National Olympic Committees of Africa, and Mr. Arsene Julfalakian. He is the Chair of the United Wrestling Athletes Commission from Armenia. We also invited the Minister for Sport and Olympic and Paralympic Games in France, Mrs. Amélie Oudéa-Castéra, the honoring Lady Fraser from UK, and Mrs. Alexandra Xantaki, Special Rapporteur in the fields of cultural rights of the UN. The last three names send us videos. We invited them in really, but it was not possible for all of them to come. We are happy that we have guests here in real. And sorry, Mr. Kanter, I did not forget you. Mr. Kanter is the chairperson of the Athletic Commission of European Olympic Committees, and he is from Estonia. He will be online later. Now, dear Secretariat, I would decide that we start with the video of the Minister for Sports from France. Is it possible, Amelia?
De la Commission, Mesdames et Messieurs les parlementaires. Je vous remercie de votre invitation à participer à cette audition. Il m'était impossible d'y assister, ce que je regrette, a fortiori au regard de l'importance du sujet, et je vous prie de m'en excuser. Mais je souhaitais vraiment pouvoir m'adresser à vous par ce message vidéo, et j'ai également demandé à notre représentation permanente à Strasbourg de me rendre compte de vos échanges, dont je suivrai avec beaucoup d'attention les prochaines étapes. Vous le savez, la France condamne de la manière la plus vive l'agression menée contre l'Ukraine par la Russie avec le soutien de la Biélorussie. Une agression illégale, injustifiée et injustifiable qui viole les règles les plus fondamentales du droit international. Mon pays est à ce titre mobilisé pour que les sanctions économiques, politiques, diplomatiques, culturelles, mais aussi sportives, prises à l'encontre de la Russie et de la Biélorussie se poursuivent et même s'intensifient tant que cette guerre d'agression perdurera. La France est également déterminée à rendre la Russie comptable de ses actes et soutient activement les travaux engagés en ce sens au Conseil de l'Europe. Dans ce contexte où l'injustice la plus cruelle se mêle à l'atrocité la plus révoltante, la France se tient résolument aux côtés de l'Ukraine et du peuple ukrainien et continuera de l'aider du mieux qu'elle le peut dans toutes les dimensions, et notamment dans le champ sportif. Rappelons que plus de 230 athlètes et entraîneurs ukrainiens ont été tués par les forces russes lors de l'agression contre l'Ukraine. Rappelons que près de 350 sites sportifs ont été détruits ou endommagés en Ukraine, obligeant certains clubs à aller jouer ailleurs, en dehors de leur pays, et en condamnant d'autres à ne plus jouer du tout. Rappelons que les sportifs qui sont restés là-bas en Ukraine, dont de jeunes enfants, dont de jeunes espoirs du sport ukrainien, évoluent dans l'angoisse et l'insécurité les plus totales. Dès le premier jour de l'invasion de l'Ukraine par la Russie, la France s'est mobilisée fortement pour venir en aide aux réfugiés ukrainiens et notamment aux sportifs. Nos établissements publics sportifs ont ainsi hébergé et hébergent encore, pour certains, familles, enfants, athlètes, pour leur permettre de continuer à vivre le plus normalement possible et à s'entraîner en bénéficiant d'infrastructures de qualité. Les collectivités locales, les entreprises, les foyers français et le mouvement sportif leur apportent leur aide, avec notamment un fonds de solidarité qui a permis à 13 fédérations de prendre en charge l'accueil des délégations ukrainiennes et leur participation à un ensemble de compétitions sportives internationales organisées sur notre sol. Pour amplifier cette aide, le gouvernement français, en lien notamment avec la commission Solidarité olympique du CIO, a récemment décidé d'engager une aide spécifique d'1 million d'euros pour la délégation ukrainienne en vue des Jeux olympiques et paralympiques de Paris 2024. Cette aide permettra la prise en charge complète de son camp de base pour sa préparation aux Jeux et nous sommes en lien avec Vadim Gutsait, le ministre ukrainien des Sports et de la Jeunesse et président du Comité national olympique, pour sa bonne mise en œuvre dans les mois qui viennent. Avec la détermination d'offrir à l'équipe d'Ukraine, tant olympique que paralympique, les meilleures conditions possibles de préparation pour les Jeux de Paris. De nombreux pays qui soutiennent l'Ukraine et qui reconnaissent qu'elle est sans nul équivoque possible la victime d'une inadmissible agression russe, savent en même temps qu'il nous revient collectivement de ne pas méconnaître le principe onusien de non-discrimination des personnes à raison de leur nationalité ou de leur passeport. 2 rapporteurs spéciaux du Conseil des droits de l'homme des Nations Unies ont fait part de leurs préoccupations concernant une exclusion des athlètes russes et biélorusses des compétitions internationales sur la seule base de leur nationalité. Le 1er février 2023, ces experts ont publié un communiqué de presse afin de rappeler leur position. Le comité olympique et plus largement la communauté olympique ont également l'obligation impérieuse de respecter la charte olympique et plus globalement les normes internationales interdisant les discriminations. Ce sont leurs propos. Et ils ont ajouté que lorsque des États ignorent de manière aussi flagrante les droits humains, nous avons une obligation plus grande encore de défendre nos valeurs communes. Leur prise de position fait suite à la résolution Le sport, moteur du développement durable, adoptée par l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies le 1er décembre 2022. Dans ce contexte, la question que nous nous posons collectivement est si la participation d'athlètes russes et biélorusses aux compétitions sportives internationales dans le cadre d'un régime de stricte neutralité peut s'envisager et selon quelles modalités? C'est la question qu'ont posée 35 pays, dont la France, dans le cadre d'une déclaration publiée le 21 février dernier intitulée « Statement on Russia's War on Ukraine and International Sport ». Et ce n'est pas une question simple, quand on connaît les liens étroits, à la fois historiques et toujours vivaces, comme l'a montré l'actualité la plus récente, entre le sport et le pouvoir en Russie. La France reconnaît et respecte l'autonomie du mouvement sportif. Et s'agissant des Jeux olympiques et paralympiques, c'est donc bien le CIO et le Comité international paralympique, l'IPC, qui prendront, chacun dans leur domaine de responsabilité, une décision souveraine concernant la participation des athlètes russes et biélorusses. Mais à nous, responsables politiques, comptables devant nos opinions publiques, il nous faut comprendre concrètement ce que pourrait signifier ce modèle de neutralité et quelle peut être sa viabilité dans le contexte que l'on sait. Le CIO est au travail sur le sujet et l'IPC réexaminera la question en vue de son Assemblée générale de septembre prochain. Les recommandations formulées par le CIO le 28 mars dernier ne valent pas pour les Jeux de Paris 2024. Elles n'ont à ce stade été émises à l'endroit des fédérations internationales que pour les compétitions sportives internationales. Mais déjà, elles marquent de premières clarifications, autour de 5 points sur lesquels je souhaite revenir. Les athlètes russes et biélorusses ne peuvent concourir qu'en tant qu'athlètes individuels neutres. La participation en équipe des athlètes russes ou biélorusses ne peut être envisagée. Il est exclu que les athlètes, tout comme le personnel d'encadrement qui soutiennent activement la guerre, puissent être admis. Quatrièmement, les athlètes, tout comme le personnel d'encadrement, qui sont sous contrat avec l'armée russe ou biélorusse ou avec des agences de sécurité nationale, ne peuvent pas non plus concourir. Cinquième élément, les athlètes individuels neutres doivent satisfaire à toutes les exigences et règles antidopage qui leur sont applicables. En complément de ces 5 éléments, le CIO, qui a réaffirmé sa solidarité avec les athlètes ukrainiens, a bien précisé que les sanctions sportives prises à l'encontre de ceux qui sont responsables de la guerre, les États et gouvernements russes et biélorusses, restaient évidemment en place. Aucune manifestation sportive internationale ne doit être organisée ni soutenue par une fédération internationale ou un comité olympique en Russie ou en Biélorussie. Aucun drapeau, aucun hymne, aucune couleur ni aucune autre identification de quelque nature que ce soit de ces pays ne doivent être présents lors de rencontres ou de manifestations sportives. Enfin, aucun représentant des gouvernements ou des États russes et biélorusses ne peut être invité ni accrédité à une rencontre ou à une manifestation sportive internationale. Chaque fédération internationale travaille actuellement à se positionner sur le sujet et compte tenu de ce cadre, dans le cadre de sa propre gouvernance. Les fédérations internationales d'escrime, de tennis de table, de taekwondo, de lutte, de triathlon, de skate et de pentathlon moderne, par exemple, ont décidé d'ores et déjà de réintégrer, sous bannière neutre, les athlètes russes et biélorusses dans leurs compétitions, non sans remous parfois, au sein de leur propre communauté d'athlètes. C'est aussi le choix fait en tennis, par exemple, par le tournoi de Wimbledon, qui se réaligne ainsi sur l'approche adoptée dès l'origine par les autres tournois du Grand Chelem. Mais à l'inverse, World Athletics, la Fédération internationale d'athlétisme, elle, a très clairement exclu toute idée de réintégration des Russes et des Biélorusses. Et les fédérations internationales d'équitation, de basketball, de hockey sur glace, de badminton ont également pris position à ce stade contre leur retour, parfois en application directe d'ailleurs des recommandations du CIO s'agissant de sport par équipe. On le voit, les lignes doivent encore se préciser et se stabiliser au sein du mouvement sportif. Certaines fédérations internationales, comme la natation ou la gymnastique, ont par exemple indiqué souhaiter prendre plus de temps avant de se prononcer dans leur discipline. Dans ce contexte, si l'éclairage du CIO a permis d'une part d'enclencher des prises de position au sein du mouvement sportif et d'autre part de commencer à encadrer ce qu'on peut entendre par neutralité, de façon d'ailleurs, je le relève, plus stricte que ce que certains organisateurs ou circuits professionnels avaient fait jusqu'à présent pour leurs propres compétitions, il reste des questions ouvertes, des plus concrètes aux plus fondamentales qui devront être traitées pour les Jeux de Paris. Qu'en est-il, par exemple, de la participation en paire aux compétitions, où les individus concourent en duo, comme en badminton ou en aviron, et non en équipe, au sens des sports collectifs? Quelle position le CIO entend-il prendre vis-à-vis d'athlètes financés par l'État russe ou biélorusse, ou de ceux sponsorisés ou bénéficiant d'un soutien financier de la part d'entités ayant des liens avec les États russes ou biélorusses? Comment, dans la démarche de neutralité qui est recherchée, le CIO envisage-t-il un processus de sélection d'athlètes, un processus qui soit rigoureusement indépendant du pouvoir russe et biélorusse? Et à quoi, concrètement, ce processus pourrait-il ressembler? Le CIO aujourd'hui poursuit ses consultations et ses travaux avec l'IPC et nous suivons tout cela avec la plus grande attention, tant du côté olympique que paralympique. Et dans le même temps, et plus que jamais, la France reste mobilisée et se tient aux côtés du peuple ukrainien, déterminée à tout mettre en œuvre à son niveau pour que la délégation olympique et paralympique ukrainienne soit la plus forte et la mieux préparée possible aux Jeux de Paris 2024. S'il peut paraître quelque peu secondaire de se préoccuper de performances sportives pour un pays pareillement agressé comme l'est l'Ukraine aujourd'hui, vous savez comme moi que participer au plus grand événement sportif planétaire et s'y illustrer constitue un extraordinaire message, une nouvelle fois, de résilience, une source qui sera une source supplémentaire de fierté pour tous les Ukrainiens et toutes les Ukrainiennes, où qu'ils se trouvent dans le monde, et aussi un formidable symbole d'espoir. Espoir que ces victoires sportives, en bleu, en jaune, en bleu et jaune, en appellent une autre, plus grande encore, plus globale, celle de tout un peuple, de toute une nation. Je vous remercie pour votre attention et pour vos travaux, dont je suis persuadée qu'ils continueront de faire progresser la réflexion collective dans les semaines et les mois à venir sur ce sujet de première importance. À bientôt à Strasbourg pour poursuivre ces échanges.
I'm surprised how the Minister for Sport is excellent expert of the different disciplines of sport. And what I noticed that from the beginning, she made the same level between Olympic Games and Paralympic Games. I think this is very, very important for Paralympic Games, that the country stands behind the Paralympic Games. And I think it's very important. Now she made the link to the UN. So now, as moderator, I have now a problem, and I make now a decision. Maybe Roberto looks bad, but we start now the video from the United Nations Special Rapporteur Alexandra Xantaki. But I say to the technique, after 5 minutes, please stop. And we will put the whole video on the website. But when we have now this long video, then the time is running away. So can I ask the technique to start the video and stop after 5 minutes?
The Xantaki or the Lucy Fraser, who is the UK minister?
No, who is the longer is Xantaki? No,
Xantaki
she said always the UN and the UN. So let's make Xantake 5 minutes, then please stop by yourself.
Thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this event, and I'm only sorry that I cannot be there at the moment. However, I'm grateful for the opportunity to express my views regarding the participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in the Olympic Games. I have repeatedly commented publicly on the illegality of the war in Ukraine and the suffering and human rights violations that this war brings. I have made several public statements and continue to be very actively involved in commenting on the effects this illegal war has, both on the cultural heritage in Ukraine and on the cultural identities in Ukraine. On the 14th of September 2022, though, jointly with the Special Rapporteur on Racism, I sent a letter to the International Olympic Committee. In that letter, I expressed serious concern about the recommendation to ban Russian and Belarusian athletes and officials, such as judges, from international competitions, based solely on their nationality, as a matter of principle. This raised serious issues of non-discrimination. My interest is part of my wider concern about increasing unjustified restrictions affecting Russian and Belarusian artists, academics, and scientists merely on the basis of their nationality, not only abroad, but in their own countries, since the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The right to participate in cultural life, which is protected under international law, includes the right to participate in sports, hence my interest in the exclusion of Russian and Belarusian athletes from sporting events. I chose to send the letter to the IOC as in September 2022 because the IOC has affirmed through its strategic framework on human rights its commitment to respect human rights within its remit in accordance with the UN guiding principles on businesses and human rights. Also, Fundamental Principle 4 of the Olympic Charter confirms that the practice of sport is a human right and establishes that every individual must have the possibility of practicing sport without discrimination of any kind. Fundamental Principle 6 repeats this prohibition of discrimination. So there it goes. The continuing blanket prohibition of Russian and Belarusian athletes on the basis of their nationality violates the principles of universality and non-discrimination, two of the most fundamental human rights principles. Such a ban confuses states' behaviors with individuals' behavior, something that international human rights law prohibits. Punishing individuals, athletes, solely based on their nationality for the heinous acts of leaders over which they have no control undermines this distinction between states and individuals. Further, such blanket prohibition actually undermines peace rather than promotes it. The practice of sport is an instrument for preventing conflict and promoting long-lasting peace and development objectives, as the United Nations has recognized. In the face of threats to peace and security, we should all resist to being lured to further aggression. Instead, we should maintain our checks and balances when it comes to restrictions of human rights. Searching for avenues that allow all athletes who have not committed human rights violations, whatever their nationality, to engage in sports is acting to prevent the further erosion of our common values and to promote peace and understanding. Now, this does not mean that restrictions of athletes are not allowed under international human rights law. International law authorizes limitations and restrictions to most human rights, but following specific standards. Limitations to the right to participate in cultural life, including sports, must be determined by law, must pursue a legitimate aim, must be compatible with the nature of the right, and be absolutely necessary for the promotion of the general welfare in a democratic society.
The whole statement you can find on the website. And now we have the video from the Honorable Lucy Fraser. She is Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport in the United Kingdom. And this video was the only video what was in time, so in a short way, and so we can see now the whole video. And by the way, there is Mr. Adam Conant. He will give answers to questions to Lucy Fraser.
I want to start with an apology. I'd love to be there with you for what I know will be an informed and fruitful discussion, and one that will lead to a valuable report. And I'm hugely grateful to your President for the kind invitation to speak to you all today, and to have a chance to reinforce the UK government's position on the participation of Russia and Belarus in international sport. I'd also like to extend my thanks to all the members of the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media for your illuminating work in this area. The UK government has been committed to the people of Ukraine from day one of Putin's barbaric invasion, and that commitment is an unwavering one. Any change to our position on the participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes representing their states in international sport would be incompatible with that commitment and incompatible with our values as a country. As this Council knows, the Olympic truce, a principle that dates back to the 9th century BC to promote peace, friendship and understanding through sport, and is agreed at the UN, has been broken by Russia not once, but twice. The first time was rather unbelievably at their own hosting of the Winter Games at Sochi in 2014, and the second was during the Beijing Games in 2022. Russia has shown nothing but contempt for the values of the Olympics movement, and its flouting of the rules has extended beyond the current conflict, as we saw with its involvement in doping programs. The facts are incontrovertible. Russia has devastated Ukraine. Russia has killed Ukrainian athletes, and Russia has smashed Ukraine's sports infrastructure to smithereens. This regime does not deserve to see its athletes line up on the starting blocks of races or stand on podiums during medal ceremonies as representatives of their countries. As part of our absolute commitment to Ukraine and Ukrainian sovereignty, we have used the convening power of sport to bring together a coalition of 35 countries opposed to Russian and Belarusian participation in international sport. The collective statements we issued in March and July of last year and February of this year set out shared principles that all those countries agreed on. Our common goal is for sporting bodies to minimize the ability of Russia and Belarus to use sport for political gain. We recognize and want to maintain the autonomy of sport, and we support those national and international sports bodies who have shown moral clarity and exceptional leadership in this area. Bodies like the World Athletics Council that reaffirmed their decision in March to exclude Russian and Belarusian athletes. World Athletics President Seb Coe highlighted the substantial damage that Russia and Belarus have already done to integrity of our major international competitions. It is our collective gift to restore that integrity. And I want to be clear on one point, which is really at the heart of this issue, that this is not about punishing individual Russian or Belarusian athletes. These individuals have dedicated their lives to sport. What we stand against is athletes competing to represent the state of Russia and Belarus. There is a fundamental difference. The UK government has from March 2022 been clear in our guidance to our own domestic sports bodies that individual Russian and Belarusian athletes can compete as neutrals on UK soil, as long as they are really neutral and not representing their states in any way. And we have been equally clear on what that neutrality looks like. These athletes must not under any circumstances express support for the war or the Russian and Belarusian regimes. This extends to athlete funding. So athletes funded by their states to compete in events or who are in receipt of funding or sponsorship directly aligned to their states, such as from state-controlled companies like Gazprom, cannot be considered to be neutral. Athletes directly funded by their states to compete in sports competitions who would not be present at those events without that support are de facto representatives of those states. They are only there by virtue of being funded by, trained by, selected by, supported by the Russian state. And in that sense, from the UK perspective, both ourselves and the International Olympic Committee, through its recommended recommendations on neutrality to the international federations of the 28th of March, are both seeking the same outcome, ensuring that Russian and Belarusian states cannot be represented in international sport. We have seen the IOC start to address some of the concerns our group of 35 nations raised in February, and that is to be welcomed. But the IOC's recommendations do not go far enough for us, and they leave far too many unanswered questions. Our deep reservations extend across 3 areas. Firstly, there is no reference anywhere in the recommendations to state funding, which I have said is a breach of neutrality. That issue is simply too fundamental to be ignored, and it strikes at the very heart of what neutrality is. Secondly, the provisions set out on military and national security agency links are currently minimal, especially when we know that the links between state, military, and sport in Russia and Belarus are root and branch. And if you think that sounds like an exaggeration, consider the fact that the 2 leading Russia sports societies, the Central Sports Club of the Army and the Dynamo Sports Society, were founded by the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Internal Affairs, respectively. Athletes trained by those 2 societies consistently bring home by far the largest share of Russian Olympic medals. Many Russian athletes have been active in their support for Putin's invasion. The limited focus of the IOC's recommendations around people being currently contracted to the military or national security agencies really does not account for the intrinsic relationship between the military and security apparatus. Our concern also covers the potential for loopholes, with people being uncontracted before events and then recontracted afterwards to allow them to compete. In Belarus, the Lukashenko regime maintains close control of Belarusian sport, with the Belarus Olympic Committee and Presidential Sports Club, which provides direct financial support to Belarusian athletes, led by Lukashenko's sons. The scenes at pro-war rally at the Luzhniki Stadium last year with Putin using Olympic athletes to promote his aggression only served to underline this issue. Thirdly, we have ongoing serious concerns about how these provisions will be implemented effectively, robustly, and consistently. For example, there are issues around the consistent definition of teams and whether pairs of athletes could be allowed. This issue is one that needs further clarification. Let's be clear on why this matters. You can't compete in a team event at the Olympics other than by virtue of being the same nationality and representing your country. There are no options to pair up across country borders, so there can be no place for any teams of any numbers. We are already seeing a great deal of confusion across sport as international federations take different approaches on the issue of allowing Russian and Belarusian athletes back into competition. And our fear is this will only escalate over coming weeks, exacerbated by the current lack of clarity on future participation at Paris 2024 for those Russians and Belarusians who may have qualified at events this summer. In all of these discussions, we must not lose sight of what issues are at stake. More than 220 Ukrainian athletes and coaches have so far lost their lives at the hand of Russian aggression. Countless more have been forced to flee or defend their homeland from invading forces. Our countries all have the luxury of talking about our participation in future sporting events, events that will bring joy to millions and showcase our greatest athletes. Meanwhile, Ukrainian sports facilities have been destroyed or severely damaged by this war. None of us should countenance the idea of a Ukrainian athlete being forced to share a pitch, a court, a field, a starting line with state-sponsored athletes from Russia and Belarus. The IOC must clarify their position or go back to the drawing board, resolve these issues I have set out today, implement an approach that guarantees only truly neutral athletes can participate. Then we can get back to sport. Thank you all for your time today. I want to start with an apology.
This lady knows 5 minutes are 5 minutes. I can say thank you. Now, from the level of politics, we come now to the level of sport. We invited the International Olympic Committee, and they nominated 3 guests to us. Mr. Francesco Riccipitti, he is the president of the Summer Olympic International Federations. And they nominated Mrs. Gabi Arens from Namibia. She's the chair of the Athletic Commission. And Mr. Arsen Julfalakian from Armenia, the chair of the United World Wrestling Commission. If you agree, I give now first the floor to Mr. Ricci Bitti, and is it possible, I know I'm Austrian, you are Italian, we know that we like to speak long, but is it possible with 5 minutes?
I try my best.
Okay.
I think you have been, I saw that, dear President, dear Chairman of the Commission, I'm thanking for the invitation. I'm not a guest, I was invited also from the beginning. And I came in person to pay tribute to this organization and institution that is one in this difficult time, very difficult time, that understand the importance of cooperation with sport and the relevance of sport in the society, the growing relevance of sport. We are aware of that, and this is the reason we are here. In these 5 minutes, I tried to very shortly to tell you what the group of people that I represented is the major stakeholder of the IOC, obviously the International Federation Olympic, have evolved in their position regarding to the item. I go exactly to the item, and I go back to the February 22 when the Russian invaded the Ukrainian territory. And I want to remind you that the IOC was one of the few, if not the only, global international organization to take immediately decision in two sides. One was sanction, very tough sanction on the Russian and Belarusian responsible people. I don't want to repeat because my friend Amélie has already listed and she's very informed, so I don't want to repeat this. But the sanctions were very tough and they're still in place. At the same time, the Olympic movement put in place an unprecedented effort of solidarity with Ukraine that continue today and involve a lot of money. I can tell you that 85% of my international federation are acting and spending money to help the Ukrainian athlete to be ready for the Olympic Games and for the international competition. The president of the IOC, during his visit in Ukraine, approved a funding of 7.5 million, 3 times the first fund given to support the Ukrainian athlete. But a part of this two decision, the second part was the what we call protective measure. We don't like in sport to talk about protective measure, obviously, because it's against the mission of sport to include, but we had to do at the time, means February 2022. And we decided for two basic reasons to exclude and to recommend Russian and Belarusian athletes from the international competition at the time. For two main reasons, as I said, the security risk between the emotion on the field between athletes of different countries, different position, respectful position, obviously, Ukrainian, Russian, and Belarusian. And the second reason was obviously to anticipate something that has already been said that is very sensitive to our mission, the autonomy of sport, the trend, as was very clearly expressed by the British minister, I'm sorry to say that the autonomy of sport has to be defended. And we saw a trend in many governments to try to decide which athletes should have participated in competition, important competition in their own country. So the situation, many people said why the situation has not changed. The situation perhaps is not changed, unfortunately, on the field of war, but has changed a lot in our environment. And I mentioned two things. The participation of neutral athletes in many sports is a fact, and it happened without any incident, any problem. The most prominent sport is my sport, tennis, but also cycling, football, handball. Many Russian and Belarusian athletes participate without any problems. And on top of that, there has been a trend also by important government to release visa, not to retain visa, and to release visa, to issue visa without many exceptions. So I believe that this is also a good sign. Last but not least, a personal note, as a member, life member of the All England Club of Wimbledon, I noted, and I would be very curious to know, I'm sorry that the minister of British minister is not here in person, because he should clarify me Why is the condition of readmission in Wimbledon of the athlete, that I'm very pleased as member of the club, is perhaps based on less restrictive measures than the one that we as IOC movement want to put in place, but it's a matter of question. So if you put on top of this the rapporteur of United Nations that we heard, and I want to remind also that obviously the proximity play a great role in being sensitive to a war, but we have about 70 conflicts in the war, in the world now, and no place, and I'm very pleased to hear later Dr. Julpa Lakian that is living in the Caucasus crisis region, and surely they never ask the opponent or the other party to be excluded from the competition, even if we are in a sort of war with other countries. So having said all this, the last comment I want to do is philosophical. We have to go back to origin of the modern sport and to de Coubertin. De Coubertin said that the only way to have peace is to bring the youth, the whole country, I quote his wording shortly, together for amicable trials of sport. This is a great tool to have peace. So we have to keep the dialogue open. We have to put bridge if possible. And this is a mission of sport, to unite in a peaceful competition. So where we stand now, this is my conclusion. We stand that on December 22, the vast majority of the stakeholders of the IOC recommend the IOC to give criteria of neutrality for the readmission of athletes in the international competition. We are still currently working. The IOC did a big effort, and at the end of February issue what has been mentioned very clearly again by the French minister, clearly issue a criteria of neutrality. We are still working on that, because after the criteria there is the implementation that is not easy, and the control that is a serious process as required very strongly by our British minister. So we are working on that in these days. We have different view, but don't overestimate. Some of the federations that have been mentioned agree with the principle of readmission, but they don't need, because they don't have Russian athletes interested in the Olympic Games, so they have not so much to deal with this matter, so they are lucky enough. We monitor this with the IOC. We are very close to the final process. That means the implementation process of this criteria. We are confident that this will work, and we start working with international competition. Then, last comment about the IOC and the games in Paris, because this is the end of the story, the games in Paris and in Milano Cortina for the winter one. The IOC took time. He said we have to see how it works in the international competition, and then we will decide later on the qualification of we monitor this process. We are very concerned because the qualification system should be happening now. We see which kind of system we will use, but we, together the IOC, we try to do our best to have a very transparent and acceptable process at the end. Let me close with one sentence. I believe, having heard the president of the Olympic Committee of Russia saying that the criteria established in the IOC recommendation are a farce because are too restrictive, and having heard our Ukrainian friend that we understand the feeling and the emotion, but we should not agree all the time, saying that this is unacceptable for the other side because it doesn't respect the sacrifice of the country. I believe that with these two point of view, I think we are on the right track.
Can you switch off the microphone? So thank you, Francesco Ricci-Pitti. Now we come to the athletics. Gabi Arends from Namibia. You are the voice of the African sports person by the National Olympic Committee. Please, the floor is yours. Also 5 minutes, if possible.
Yes. Dear Vice Chairperson of the Committee, dear President of the Assembly, dear ladies and gentlemen in this room, dear ladies and gentlemen following this roundtable virtually, and as is custom to say in my home country, Namibia, to leave nobody behind, all protocols observed. My name is Gabi Arends. I represented my country Namibia at 3 Olympic Games in the sport of shooting between 2008 and 2016. I have recently been elected by my African peers to serve as the chairperson of our Continental Athletes Commission, an all-African athletes representative body. First of all, I would like to state that I strongly condemn all ongoing wars and conflicts happening across the world. There are way too many lives lost in wars and conflicts, and I'm deeply saddened to hear about any of them. In the context of the war in Ukraine, my sincerest sympathy goes out to the Ukrainian people. The Association of National Olympic Committees of Africa's Athletes Commission represents the interests of African athletes. It is our responsibility to ensure that the voice of African athletes is expressed, articulated, and considered by the associated decision-making bodies of the Olympic movement. The main purpose of the Anoka Athletes Commission is to ensure that the opinions of the athletes are successfully gathered through the network of athletes commissions of national Olympic committees that are members of our continental body. Our Athletes Commission is composed of 16 athletes, and they come from 15 national Olympic committees from across the African continent. Just last month, we held the African Athletes Forum in Algeria, where over 100 athlete representatives from 50 national athletes commissions from Africa participated. As athletes, as representatives of athletes within their countries, these 100 athlete representatives are elected by their peers at a national level to represent and share the views of athletes from their countries. During this forum, we had an in-depth discussion around the mission of sport and what would this mean in relation to various conflicts and wars around in the world. As you know very well, unfortunately in Africa, we are very familiar with the issue of armed conflict between countries and within countries. This is why this topic is very important to athletes on our continent. For us in Africa, the issue of wars and armed conflict is not foreign. The resolution from over 100 athlete representatives at the Africa Athletes Forum was, and I quote here, "Athletes should never pay the price of a conflict, wherever it is and whatever it is. Politics should not put pressure on sport to withdraw from its fundamental values of solidarity and unity." End of quote. The African athletes expressed their full support to welcome the return of Russian and Belarusian athletes competing as neutral athletes in international competition. The participants of the African Athletes Forum fully support the independence of the Olympic movement based on the principles of Olympism, without discrimination of nationality, religion, and ethnicity. In this regard, the forum participants resolved that athletes should not be penalized for the actions of their governments. I should also note that some of our athlete representatives asked that the Russian and Belarusian athletes must be able to return to international competition without any restrictions, meaning they should be able to participate under the national flag and anthem. If the Olympic Games become a platform only for athletes coming from like-minded countries or whose governments are at peace, it would not be a true reflection of the world, and we would not be able to achieve our mission to unite the world in a peaceful competition despite the differences there are between countries and people. If governments took over the decisions regarding which athlete can partake in which competition, it would mean the end of world sport as we know it today. Athletes should take part in international competition based on their sporting merits and not on political grounds or because of their passports. On behalf of athletes from Africa and our Athlete Commission, I would like to reiterate that athletes should never pay the price of a conflict their government is involved in. Thank you very much for your attention. This concludes my opening remarks.
Thank you, Mrs. Ahrens. And now, the chair of the United World Wrestling Commission, Mr. Arsene Chulfalakian. Please, the floor is yours. Please, also 5 minutes. And I saw that four colleagues asked for the floor. Now I'm very happy. I see that we get more gender balance now in the question. Now we have 7. 8, but now I think we comes to a limit in the time. Arsene, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Honorable Mr. President, Mr. Vice Chairman, respectful participants of the hearing, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and share with you my perspective on this important topic. Let me briefly tell you about myself. I'm Arsene Chulfalakian, PhD in History and International Relations, 3-time Olympian, Olympic silver medalist, world and European champion, World Cup winner in wrestling from Armenia. In 2021, I was elected by my fellow wrestlers from across the world, that is more than 180 countries, as the chair of the Athletes Commission of the United World Wrestling, the international governing body for wrestling. I am also a member of the United World Wrestling Executive Board. You might ask why I've mentioned my nationality, because it has direct connection with the topic we are discussing right now. In September 2020, Azerbaijan brutally attacked Armenia with a full-scale war. Armenia lost it. Officially, we had more than 4,000 soldiers killed, 11,000 wounded, and about 10,000 square kilometer territory was occupied. 1 year later, we had another massive war, with more than 200 Armenian soldiers killed and about 200 square kilometer territory occupied. I trust you can imagine how well I realize what war means and looks like. During the war, I lost relatives, friends, and people whom I knew pretty closely and loved a lot. In my home country, we can feel the war every day. As we speak now, my 120,000 compatriots, among them 30,000 children, have been blockaded by Azerbaijan in Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh region for more than 4 months, with no sufficient food, medicine, and basic products. This February, the International Court of Justice in Hague officially ordered Azerbaijan to open the life corridor, but without any results so far. Despite all, I have never used my position in different international sports conferences or meetings to call for a total ban of the Azerbaijani athletes. And I am not going to do that here either. About the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, for me it's a personal tragedy to see these two very close neighboring nations at war. I know these countries very, very well. Since my childhood, I have spent a lot of time there with great memories. Even my first cadet coach is currently a coach in the Ukrainian wrestling team. I have friends and peers on both sides, and it is very painful to see how their population is suffering now. I extend my most sincere condolences to the people who lost relatives and friends in this tragedy. When we are talking about the possible participation of Russian and Belarusian individual athletes in international competitions, I would like to emphasize that we are discussing their return as neutral athletes. This is the key concept around which we should focus our discussion. Sanctions are not lifted. They are not going to be lifted, as Minister of Sport of France mentioned. There are no tournaments, no officials, no anthem, no flag, no team, sports, etc. So we are speaking only about the athletes who have nothing common with the political processes, not involved in war, but only doing their professional job, professional sport. As a former member of parliament in Armenia, I know very well how political decision-making works. I understand and appreciate the significance of this war from the geopolitical perspective and how it might make it different than other wars from the political standpoint. However, the Olympic Charter and the Olympic values work differently. They don't and cannot make a difference between the right of the athletes because of the geopolitical issues. The Olympic Charter is crystal clear in its guidance for the Olympic movement. There cannot be any discrimination for any reason. Human rights, democracy, non-discrimination of any athlete on the basis of their nationality. Are these values really important for us, or do we use them selectively? Just imagine the emotional condition of an athlete having this in mind. For 10, 15, 20 years or more, the athlete is waking up with one sole dream in his mind, to become an Olympic champion. And suddenly politicians destroy their dream with banning them from the competitions. They don't care, these athletes don't care about the international relations. They just want to do what they love to do and what they are good at. I don't know what to say about the youngsters. They even have no right to vote. All over the world, we are fighting successfully against criminality through sport, drugs, prostitution, bans. One of the best ways to overcome those dangers is the sport. And we ban it without any differentiation. What are we doing? Instead of solving the problem, we are making it bigger. My position is based on the belief that sport should never be politicized. It's not acceptable to use sport as an instrument for punishment. It is not up to governments to decide who can take part in sporting competitions, because that would be the end of international sport competitions. There are dozens of ongoing conflicts in the world right now, with unfortunately way too many people suffering and dying. This was the case, or still is, in some countries such as Iraq, former Republic of Yugoslavia, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and many others. Can anyone remember a case when all the athletes of a country were banned because of an armed conflict or a war? As a sport official, I could not explain to an athlete why he or she should be banned from the sport because of the decisions of their governments. How can banning culture, education, or sport help to overcome this terrible situation? Does it mean no more Pushkin, Dostoevsky, Tchaikovsky, no more Russian students in Western universities? I can't see real arguments for doing so. Many thanks for your attention, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Thank you very much.
So, Michael, thank you very much. Now, before I give the floor to our colleagues, I say, Mr. Kanter, can you ask now in Estonia for the floor? You are our last online guest. Mr. Kanter?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Okay.
Oh, okay, now it's perfect. Thank you. Please, also please 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Dear Mr. President, dear Vice Chair, dear participants. My name is Gerd Kanter. I represent country Estonia. I'm EOC Athletes Commission Chair. I'm a 4-time Olympian. I have Olympic gold and Olympic bronze medal. It is sad that we have to have this debate on this topic at such a high level, but it's quite clear that full responsibility on this war lays on current Russian leadership. We're in a situation where every reaction is loaded and urge counter-reaction. At this point, no decision is not made, but pressure is on, and the decision is very time-sensitive. I fully support that this decision should come inside from sport, not from governments. But due to the complexity of this topic, everything is mixed, and there are no black or white. And as we're now following many international federations' decisions, we can see that there are no clear position. But many athletes and federations from our region are at the position that this time Russian and Belarusian athletes should not participate at the next Olympic Games in Paris 2024. I give you 5 reasons. First, it is very big risk at the Games. If Ukrainian and Russian athletes will meet at the stage at the Games, it is very hard to follow Olympic rules and values for Ukrainian athletes. At the same time, when more than 230 Ukrainian athletes and coaches have been killed in a war. And if Ukrainian athlete will decide to not compete with a neutral Russian athlete on ethical reasons, it will be turned on political statement. And it will be all over the news. So games will be politicized. Secondly, IOC has responsibility to guarantee future of the games. If we make exception to current to country who is running large-scale invasion war, we will face many risks in the future. It is not the only conflict between two countries. We have to admit that more than 50 countries have agreed sanctions against Russia, including many top sports countries. If we do make this exception, it will be very irresponsibility. And if exception is guaranteed to sport, it will be also asked for many other like fields. Thirdly, who can give guarantee that war does not expand to the other countries? Every day there are new news that like Russia's leaders want to conquer former territories, including my country. It will be if it will happen, how we act, because already athletes who have get this neutral position, what is going to be their position after this. Fourthly, it is also very difficult to Russian and Belarusian athletes. If they support publicly the war, they can't participate at the games at the current rules. And if they do not condemn the war at their home, it's also very difficult, because we can hear many situations where like Russian or Belarusian athletes have like supported peace and they've been put into a prison. Fifth, it is not only a matter of sport and politics, it is also ethical. If we take decision and accept athletes from aggressor countries, we take also part of responsibility on casualties and victims. War is expanding and we don't know how does it end. Even if we take neutral position, it is still political and we support war. If we let thousands of people still dying and we stay away, it's very hard. It is impossible in this situation, it is impossible in this situation. That's why it's best to keep aggressor countries' athletes away from next Olympics. So the time is not now. Until there is no peace agreement, we should stay where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kanter. Now I come back to Estonia, and I want to give the floor now to Indrek Saar from Estonia. He is the mover of this motion, and he is the initiator of this hearing. Indrek, is it also possible for you by 2 or 3 minutes? And after you, I want to invite the chair of this committee in the same line. And Alexander Boce, do you have a transition by your name and sex? You are Jovanovic, but I think you ask for the floor and you will be the next. Okay. So Indrek, you start, and then our chair.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone who have been had find time to participate and to discuss, because this is a fundamental question for the Council of Europe, for the House of Democracy. This motion excluding the athletes and officials of the Russian Federation and Belarus from participating in the international Olympic movement was initiated by me when we had our committee meeting on 21st and 22 of February of this year in ancient Olympia. And it was sadly almost 1 year of this day when Russian broad-scale invasion started in Ukraine. And I have to repeat what was said by the President and what is said in this motion. The Olympic Charter and the fundamental principles of Olympism clearly state that the goal of Olympism is to place sport at the service of the harmonious development of humankind, with a view to promoting a peaceful society concerned with the preservation of human dignity. Russian war of aggression is an undisputable breach of this principle, constituting a crime against humanity. The responsible perpetrators of these crimes shall be brought to justice and not to be led to hide behind the Olympic flag. When we talk about those Russian athletes who have publicly stated or expressed their support to the war, we have a rather broad moral consensus. But it gets tricky when we talk about those athletes who have not expressed their position. And before we start arguing about legal and technical nuances, let us ask ourselves, what is the mission of athletes in society? And I deeply regret that Mr. Thomas Bach didn't find his way to Strasbourg, because in 2017, we started a discussion in a broader scale when Estonia was had the presidency of European Council about the role of the coaches, sport coaches in the society. And I would really like to ask Mr. Thomas Bach, has he forgotten something? Because I say, for me, the role of or the mission of athletes in society is to be a role model, to inspire. They are our champions, our heroes. And what does a hero do? What do we expect a hero to do? When he sees that humanity is endangered, someone's rights are violated, someone is bullied, humiliated, even tortured, killed. Is a hero going to act against this injustice? Or is he going to lean on the back seat and roll up the curtain, saying that I'm just a professional? How will you justify a champion who turned a black guy and didn't stand up when the smaller ones were demoted? So, as President of the Assembly, Mr. Cox said in his introductory speech, we should not underestimate the power of sport in promoting values. And I really hope that we are not doing a disservice to Olympism and all previous and future Olympian champions by not taking a clear stand. Thank you very much.
Michael, okay. Thank you, Indrak. Now, Madam Kravchuk is the chair of this committee, and after her, I invite the rapporteur for those report, Madam Niago. But first, Madam Kravchuk, is it also possible for you both, so in 2 or 3 minutes?
Yes, I'll try to be as short as possible, but I will try to give you the overall picture. I'm from Ukraine, so I know how it's organized in Russia, and I can read a lot of Russian sources. And just a short answer to you is sport connected to government. Just Google Putin and sportsmen, and you'll see tons of pictures. They dictators always use sportsmen, cultural workers as pretty much nice furniture near them. I'm really sorry to say that, because the Russian athletes deserve better future, and they deserve better attitude. But how they're being used, and they're not leaving the country, they are still being used. And about the concerning how they're connected to the army. They are members of the Army Sports Club, sponsored by FSB, sponsored by Ministry of Internal Affairs. In the Olympiad that happened in Tokyo in 2021, all Russian medals came from the sportsmen, from the Dynamo Club, from CSKA Club that are inside of the army. And when I was listening sometimes, but you know, this conflict, well, in my country and in occupied territories, people are being tortured to death, raped, small kids on the front of their mother's eyes. And together in sportsmen, little sportsmen, kids are being killed. 11 years old athlete will never grow up and will never have a chance to go to Olympiads. Now, a short response to the legal part about the United Nations statement of the special rapporteur about the basic right. Well, at the same time, when Ukrainians cannot realize, cannot have their basic right to live, we are saying that the basic rights for Russians to do sports, they can do it. They can go to Ryazan, to Sochi, to Nizhny Novgorod and do sports. But being in the Olympics, being in the main stage, sports stage, is not a basic right. It's not a basic right. But if they stand up, they can earn this right. I'm really thankful for this discussion, and I believe that we need to send a clear message to tyranny, both in Russia and both in Belarus, that tyranny will not be tolerated, including in sports.
Thank you, Yevgeny. And now I ask also the rapporteur for this motion that you can be in time. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a question for Mr. President Richibiti. I will be short. I understand that to defend the participation of the Russian and Belarusian athletes on the Olympic Games. I understand also that is not finalized, but for this moment, what do you think that the criteria should be for a neutral participation in the Olympic Games? So to be sure that the political propaganda will not happening and the dignity and human rights for everyone will be assured. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes from Lord Fox. He was in the past rapporteur for sports, also in this committee. Please.
With due respect to our guests, I find the special pleading for sportsmen quite sickening. There are two arguments that you're putting forward. One is that there are other conflicts around the world. That's no explanation at all. What we're fighting here is, as an organization that upholds democracy, we're supporting Ukraine because they are fighting, they are dying on our behalf, fighting for democracy against totalitarianism. And how is this war going to end? It's only going to end in one way, and that is Putin deciding to give up. And how can we make him give up? There is only one way, that the people of Russia need to put pressure on him. And just as the sanctions on businessmen, on oligarchs, is to make sure that they, to protect their fortunes, put pressure on Putin. We need the athletes to put pressure on Putin. And the only way to do that is to stop them participating in any way whatsoever in these international events. And we need to be firm on this. As an organization designed to protect human rights and democracy, if we don't do that, then we're failing in our duty.
I have to look on the time because we have after the voting for the Museum Prize. Madame Helena, you had before one question to the Minister Chesnokov. Please, can you make it very short and very clear?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just need to say that it's very disappointing and incomprehensible that Mr. Bach did not accept the invitation by the President of the Assembly, Tiny Talks, and the Chair of the committee. We all know that the links between state, military, and sport in Russia and Belarus are deeply connected. Despite that, IOC ignore the fact that the athletes from Russia are state-funded. But let me be clear, state funding is state representation. So let all of us in this room agree on that. So my question goes to Ricky Bitty. You mentioned the autonomy of sport. And I wish from all my heart that we could believe in sport and their autonomy. But unfortunately, we see time after time that IOC need to defend Russia. Every time Russia challenges rule of law and human rights, make the international community lose completely trust in IOC. And that's why this assembly has to get involved in this matter. We cannot only let the sport handle this question. So, Mr. Bitty, is it perfectly fine for SOF, the International Summer Federations, that several of the federations do not follow the party line and the direction outlined by the IOC? If not, how will you meet this resistance? And will you, regardless of that, just blindly follow the IOC recommendations? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Alexander, I know you hate short speeches, but is it possible today to have a really short speech?
I'm always in reglement, so I will be. I assure you. I want to react on what I heard, and I will be very short and clear. To allow Russian and Belarusian. By the way, there is no Belarusian sportsman. This is a Russian word about Belarus. They're Belarusian, and I want to ask everybody to use the right word about Belarus. The country is Belarus, not Belarusia, because it's not Russia. And the name of their language and how to call sportsmen is Belarusian. That's very important. So I want to tell you, if we will allow Russian and Belarusian sportsmen to take part in Olympics just because they are sportsmen, that means that Olympic Games, they are not needed for anything in the world, because that's not about just who is faster or who is stronger. That's not about physics. It's about society. It's about the principle of peace. And that is the idea. If you want Russian and Belarusian sportsmen there, and I can understand part of your arguments, okay, let us do one thing. Ask them officially to condemn the war, because that is part of what is about Olympic Games. Ask them officially and in their writings to say that they're against the war, aggressive war of their country. If they are, they can go, they can take part. But if they are supporting the war, if they are supporting genocide, if they're supporting killings, if they're supporting rapings, sorry, it's not about Olympics. It's a shame and disaster. And I want for you, and I address you, don't make these huge mistake. Do not kill authority of your organizations once and forever. Ask their official position, and only on the basis of their official position, the decision can be made. Thank you.
Thank you. I did not forget you, Mr. Alexander Boce. I only made the remark that you have a wrong name in front of you. But now the floor is yours, but I know you are the speaker of the whole group of EPP, but also 2 minutes, please.
One observation, I was the first asking for the floor. Where are the Greek principle? During Olympics, no war. And I believe that you feel the continuation with the ancient Greeks. Second, I remember Olympics in 84. Soviet Union attacked Afghanistan, and it was a boycott. Do you want to have a boycott? You will have. You will have the boycott by the end. What would you do if the next Olympics would not be in Paris, but in Moscow? Would you organize it? I don't think so. Just imagine the Olympics in 1940, after the Germans, with the Soviet Union, destroyed Poland. If they would not attack Norway, Denmark, and France in 40. If you would be the rulers, would you allow the Olympics? Business as usual? Did you notice that there is a big possibility that Russians invaded Ukraine 2 weeks later than it was foresaw? Why? Olympics in China. So, can Olympics stop war? Yes. And the last observation. I was observing elections in Belarus. And we noticed that Belarusians are not very interested in observing electoral campaign. Why? Because it's always organized the way during Olympics game. And nobody is interested in politics, but they're watching Olympics. The impact that your decision could have to wake up the population in Belarus and in Russia could be determining to end this war. Thank you.
So I must give the chance to Mr. Bitte to say something, but the last speaker who asked for the floor was our former sports rapporteur, Mr. Mogans Jensen, please. And sorry, Mr. Bulai, if there is a minute free after Mr. Bitte, then I will come back, but otherwise we have a ceremony at 12:30 and it's 4 minutes before.
Well, thank you, Chair. Imposing a war on another country with all that mass destruction, lost lives, violence, has to have a clear consequence. And for me, it overrules the statutes of the Olympic movement. We have imposed sanctions on a lot of people in Russia. When you impose sanctions on companies which cannot trade, you impose sanctions on, you could say, innocent workers in Russia, who has nothing to do with this conflict. Why should this be different when it comes to people who exercise sports? Is there a special discrimination on sports people to impose sanctions than there are to other ordinary Russian citizens? I don't think so. Sport has also to take their responsibility when it comes to countries that impose wars on other countries. So I think there's only one clear signal, one clear message to send here from the Assembly, and that is to exclude officials and athletes from Russia and Belarus for the Olympic Games. And I think that the Olympic movement should take down that message.
So, Mr. Bulai, meanwhile, we tried to get 5 minutes more for you, but not for you alone. 2 minutes for you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ricci-Biti, thank you for your presence, and thank you for everyone for your presence. My comment is the following. Russian troops have occupied Transnistria and Moldova 30 years ago. The Russian Sports Federation had no comment on that. Russia has occupied 1/3 of Georgia in 2008. Russian Sports Federation had no comment on that. Russia has annexed Crimea 8-9 years ago. Russian Sports Federation, Russian sportsmen and women had no comment on that. Now there is a full war in Ukraine, and Russian Sports Federation sports have no comment on that. Putin is using its sports person as cultural diplomacy elements abroad to show an image of normality, but that's not the case. That's cultural diplomacy for war and aggression, and we should be very crystal clear in this assembly that we would not accept that. That's the message on behalf of the group that I'm leading, and the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, saying no to this type of cultural diplomacy of sports aggression and war from Russia's side. Thank you.
So, Mr. Pitti, there was some critics and some questions directly to you. The last speaker was the chair of the ALDE group, the Liberals, and you heard also the speaker of the EPP group, Mr. Bocce. So please, can you also work with 5 minutes? Thank you.
No, I will be much shorter. I think I have to answer to these two ladies that really put question to me personally with the name. The first one, they said that she understands something that is not completely accurate. So what we as a group, the vast majority of the group, vast majority means perhaps 95%, 99%, during the summit in December to explore the way for readmission at some condition. This is accurate. What you have to understand is this position was taken by us in December, and I represent this group, so I have the duty to represent what it was, to explore the possibility to readmit at some condition some athlete from Russia and Belarusian passport. Having said that, the IOC received the message of the summit. We were one of the components of the summit, and develop criteria that has been published on the end of February 2023. I hope you know, these criteria are no international, the criteria are 5 points that are mentioned this morning many times, I hope you know. They are very restrictive. The implementation is very difficult, and this is my answer to Madame Linda. Many federations has no important athlete from Russia, so they don't care, and they said we go forward because they don't have the problem. Some federation, like a question and something postponed, they gain time because the implementation to be serious, and this is a matter that has been totally disregarded this morning, to be serious in the application of this criteria is very, very difficult. We have to have in place a system with third parties that control the self-declaration, that control perhaps media, and you have to understand that we cannot say, but the principles are very clear. The teams are excluded, for instance. It's a big exclusion. We have to decide what does it mean teams. It's a big exercise. Now there are many federations engaged in that. The rowing federation perhaps is busy to decide if something is individual, something is team. So it's very complicated. We have very specific problem each federation. So some federation has no Russian problem. So this is the one that has already said we don't care. Many federations has a problem, and they are working very hard to make the system working. The process is not finished. We are monitoring this process. We will involve many third parties to control that the process will be serious in case. And then I insist, this is related to the international competitions. There's nothing to do at the moment with the Olympic Games. I can speak on behalf of the Olympic movement in this particular area. The decision about the Olympic Games has been postponed to see how the situation evolves, also the situation on the field, hopefully, but there is no decision. Now is a sort of trial on the field of the international competition. I have to repeat that in some sports, and some of them prominent, like my sport, tennis or cycling, There are Russians competing every day with no incident. So please, for your information, take note of that. They compete every day in all the parts of the world, and even the government of England, as I said, the UK, has changed their view regarding the admission to my very beloved tournament in Wimbledon.
Thank you, Mr. Pitti. So meanwhile, you all got the transcript from Mrs. Xantaki. And I must say again to Mrs. Xantaki that I'm so sorry that I had to stop the video message after 5 minutes, but we asked for 5 minutes and we are running out too long. My next sorry is to Mr. Adam Conant, the head of sport in the United Kingdom. He was able the whole time to answer questions to the Honorable Lady Lucy Fraser, but the time was running out. I thank all who participated. I thank all who was online. I thank all who sent us videos. And I think our rapporteur will come back with all those informations we got today. Thank you for the participation online and in real. Thank you very much. And what I have to say, tomorrow we will meet again at 9:30. Is it right? This committee. Thursday at 8:30. In the lobby is the ceremony for the museum prize.